We're going to be covering the arrow functions, JavaScript. So these are the newer functions that came along with ES6 versions of JavaScript. And if possible, you should be writing your functions using the arrow format. So this was the original way to write it. This was one example of the arrow format. And if we've only got the one implicit return, then we can also write this all within one statement, making the function really easy to read and a much simplified version of the original function that we had here. You can also work within objects where we've got the methods, and we can also update those using the arrow format, and that's going to also work the same way where we see that we've got the greeting being output after 1000 milliseconds. Using arrow functions in JavaScript is a cleaner and more concise way to code your JavaScript functions. So we're going to give you some examples of those. So starting up, we've got an index file. We've got the output being logged within the developer tools log at the bottom right-hand side and linked to a JavaScript file called app3.js. So the arrow functions are also known as the fat arrow functions. They're a shorthand way to declare anonymous functions in JavaScript. They were introduced with ECMAScript 6 and a more concise and less verbose alternative to regular function expressions. So here's an example of a typical function expression where we're declaring the function and then we're setting some values for the function. So it's going to take in a value of x and y. And then the block for the function, it's going to be returning back the value of x plus y. So it's going to add those two values that are being passed in together and then return back the response using the console log. Let's see what we get for sum. And then we're going to have a couple values that will pass in. So 3 and 4. Save that and we get a result of 7. So here's the equivalent of that same function, but we're going to do as an arrow function. So what we can do is we can just copy this code and now we're going to update it to be the arrow function. So we remove out the keyword function entirely and we update this to include the equal sign and the greater than sign. So it's going to be what's known as the arrow function or the arrow format. And then we're returning back the values of x plus y. So pass in that same value and now going into a function named sum2. And that's also going to return back a value of 7. So that's how we can make use of the arrow function, and it is just a cleaner way without the word function and then using the arrow format in order to return back the results. So there's several advantages of using the arrow over regular functions. It's a little bit shorter of a syntax, it's more concise, making the code easier to read and write so we can focus more on the values that are being put in. And there's also implicit return. If the arrow function has one expression, the value of the expression can be returned automatically, and you can even omit the return keyword and the curly brackets. So one more time, we're going to copy this function, and now we're going to set that up where we're going to have the implicit return. And instead of having the curly brackets and instead of the keyword return, we can remove all of that out and simply have the value of x and y being returned. So let's try that out and we'll see how that works. So that also returns the value of 7. So that allows us to write that essentially within the one statement, making it a whole lot shorter. So this is what we originally had with JavaScript, and this is if we only have the one statement that can automatically be returned, and we can remove out the curly brackets within the function. Let's create another example of using the arrow function, and this time we're going to set it up within an object and have it as a method within an object. So we can have the object, and the object can have a name. So there's a name for the person within the object, and we're going to have a greeting, and within the greeting it's going to be running a function. And here we need to use the keyword function. And what this is going to do is this is going to run a set timeout, which will also have function there, so the old function formats. And then within that function, we're going to be logging out the value of using the template literals, and it'll just say hello to whatever the name is, the value of name is that's being set within the function. and we're going to set it to run after 1,000 milliseconds a second. So now let's run that function. And then after 1 second, we get the hello using this name because it's within this block and the scope person object that we're able to reference the name value, and that gets returned back. So the arrow functions, this refers to the outer person object, and the code works as expected. So let's make an update to that, and selecting that, we're going to copy that object, create a brand new object, call it person1, and this time we're going to use the arrow format. And I'll show you what the difference is. So we still got the same name, we're going to have a greet function within there, and then instead of the set timeout, let's update the set timeout to use the arrow format. So that's getting rid of the keyword function, and what's going to be returning is going to be the console content there, and return that after 1 second. So save that, and we see that it's still working the same way, where we've got the arrow format and we're still able to use this. Now keep in mind that we can also update this into the arrow format. So let's do that. And I'll show you what happens now when we update that method to the arrow format. That's going to work as well. So that gives us a way to do an anonymous function, and we can write the greetings for the person in both ways. And once again, using the arrow format, this makes the code a little bit more readable, and it has the same functionality that we did within the original code where we were using the function keywords.